Nitai Kulkarni is a professor at RL Law College, Belgaum, and he retired as a principal of the institute. He is known for his academic knowledge and for his practitioner's perspective in the arena of law. Currently, he is the public relation officer at RL Law College, Belgaum. We welcome you, sir.
Many of you have heard the term contract in a different context in day-to-day life. But very few of you may be knowing the fact that without our knowledge in day-to-day life, we enter into hundreds of contracts. Contract sometimes in a layman's sense is understood as an agreement to construct a road or a building or a dam or a bridge. Well, it is not necessary so. Those transactions are also contracts. When you travel by train, you are entering into a contract. When you are stepping into the city bus, you are entering into a contract. When you give your house to be built by some contractor, you are entering into a contract. When you are taking admission into this institution, you are entering into a contract. When you are going to be appointed as a manager in some company, you are entering into a contract. When you buy the vegetables in the market, you are entering into a contract. Neither you know that a contract is created, nor the vegetable seller knows that a contract is being created. Most of these transactions go without notice because the disputes don't arise. If you buy vegetables in the market and don't pay according to her demand, she can file a suit against you, the vegetable seller, for what? For a breach of a contract. So a question may come, where was the contract? Where is the question of breach? Where did you enter into contract? I told you therefore, you see, in the day-to-day life, without your knowledge, you are entering into hundreds of transactions which are called as a contract, creating legal consequences for the both parties. And they will become significant, you see, concepts only when the disputes arise between the parties. And so long as they are performed, there is no question of you knowing that there is a contract created for you. Then what is a contract? All contracts are governed by an act known as the Indian Contract Act of 1872. An act passed in the year 1872 by the Parliament. An act applicable to all the transactions in all the states in the Union of India, except Jammu and Kashmir, where some specific provisions are made and as excluded by the Act itself. And under the Indian Contract Act, the term contract has been defined as an agreement enforceable by law. Therefore, students of BCom must have studied all contracts or agreements, but all agreements are not necessarily contracts. Because whenever cases come before the courts of law, the question precisely asked is there a breach of a contract, which necessarily presupposes a question whether a contract has been created, because unless there is a contract, the question of breach of contract does not arise. So all contracts are necessarily agreements which are enforceable by law. Enforceable by law means which are implemented by the courts of law. Well, all agreements are not going to be enforceable by law. For example, I enter into an agreement with you saying, if you kill my friend, I will give you 1 lakh rupees. You take 1 lakh rupees from me and don't perform the promise what you have made. If I go to the court saying, here is a man who entered into an agreement promising to kill somebody by taking 1 lakh rupees and he has refused to perform his promise, can the court make an order compelling you to kill somebody? Well, common sense tells you that court is not going to make such an order, which means the agreement between me and you is not enforceable. Therefore, it is not a contract. It is an agreement, but it is not a contract because it is not recognized by the law. So all contracts are necessarily agreements enforceable by law. And what is an agreement? Section 2 of the Indian Contract Act has also defined an agreement as, you see, nothing but a promise or a set of promises. A transaction which consists of a single promise or, you see, a promise is on the part of the both parties. Then what is this a promise? A promise is defined as nothing but an accepted proposal. So all contracts are nothing but accepted proposals enforceable by law. So ultimately, to find out whether a contract has been created or not, the question to be asked is whether there has been an accepted proposal. And what is an accepted proposal? An accepted proposal is nothing but a proposal which is accepted. So the ultimate analysis comes to this. If you want to find out whether a contract is created or not, you have to ask yourself whether a proposal is there. Well, what is a proposal? That is defined in section 2, sub-clause A of the Indian Contract Act. It says, when one person signifies to another, signification is nothing but expression that is decided. When one person signifies to another his willingness to do or abstain from doing something, with a view to get the assent of that other person, he is said to make a proposal. In simple words, when a man expresses his desire to do or not to do something, expecting the consent from the other party, he is said to make a proposal. I simply make a declaration, I want to sell my book for 100 rupees. My statement is a proposal. I want to join your institution as a manager. My statement is a proposal. I want to sell my car for 50,000 rupees. My statement is a proposal. So proposal is nothing but basically a signification of a willingness, an expression of a desire made by one person to another person. How should it be made? Section 2A does not tell anything about it. It simply says, whenever a man signifies his willingness to do or not to do something, it is said to be a proposal. So the liberty is given to the man making a proposal to express it in any manner he or she likes. But how desires are expressed? Normally by speech only. If I want to sell this book, I can tell before you, saying, ladies and gentlemen, I want to sell my book for 100 rupees. One way. I can write on a piece of paper and give it to you. It is another way. I can write on the board and tell, well, look here, that is also a proposal. Or I can give a telegram to you, or send an email or a fax, or send my servant to tell you. Or if I tell you, suppose someone of you asks, sir, are you willing to sell your book? I say, well, I will consider it. And if I decide to sell it, I will send my dog to your house tomorrow. Let us say I have an intelligent dog and accordingly it comes to your house tomorrow. So the act of coming the dog to your house itself is a proposal within the meaning of section 2. Contract Act does not say that the proposal should be made in writing, except in a few circumstances where certain contracts are to be in writing. For example, if you want to sell your house, you can't express the desire in any other manner other than in the written form only. So, except in those specific cases, a contract can be in any manner the party is pleased, because a contract is a field of liberty given to the parties by the law of a contract to create the transactions and the consequent legal rights and obligations for them. So I say, well, I want to sell my book for 100 rupees, my statement becomes a proposal. Then what is an acceptance? Section 2B of the Contract Act defines and says, when the person to whom the proposal is made signifies his assent is a consent. There too means to the proposal is said to be accepted. After listening my statement, I want to sell my book for 100 rupees. If you tell that you are ready to buy the book, your statement that you are ready to buy the book would become an acceptance. The moment the proposal is accepted, immediately it becomes a promise, immediately it is an agreement, immediately it is a contract provided it is enforceable by law. Unless there is something prohibiting such kind of a transaction, everything is enforceable by law. So the moment you say, I am ready to buy your book, a contract is created between me and you. It is not necessary that I should give the book to you or you should give the money to me. Giving the book and receiving the money is a performance of the contract. But the moment you say, yes, I am ready to buy, immediately a contract is created. The consequence is legal rights and obligations are created for the parties. I am under a duty to sell the book, you are under a duty to pay the money. After agreeing to buy the book, if you say no, you don't want to buy, I can go to the court against you. For what? For a breach of a contract. Or if I refuse to sell, you can go to the court for what? Breach of a contract. So most of the cases that come before the courts of law are concerned with the precise question whether the defendant, the man against whom the suit is filed, is called as the defendant, and the man who goes to the court filing a suit is called as the plaintiff. So in most of the cases, the question precisely is whether the defendant has committed the breach of a contract, which necessarily raises a question whether a contract was created at all. Because if the defendant can prove in the court that there was no contract at all, the suit will automatically be dismissed because the question of breach of contract does not arise. It's like saying, I will break your leg. If there is no leg, there is no question of breaking the leg. So in all the cases that come before the court has to inquire whether a contract has been created, and for that purpose it makes an ultimate analysis by asking the question whether there was a valid proposal and a valid acceptance. And the proposal and acceptance are defined in such a manner as the expression of the willingness, not in the written form, in any manner. If I say, someone, as I told you, if you ask me, sir, I want to sell my book for 100 rupees. Are you ready to buy? And your statement becomes a proposal. And if I say, well, I will consider it today, and if I decide to buy it, tomorrow I will let you know. And if I decide to buy it, I will come with a rose on my coat tomorrow. Suppose tomorrow I come with a rose on my coat, without speaking anything, my act becomes an acceptance. A contract is created which is enforceable as valid as any transaction put upon a bond paper. Because what is required by the section is a consent to the proposal. How it is to be expressed is left to the party who creates it. That's why we said a contract is a field of bargaining, of freedom given by the law to the individuals. Once it is accepted, then it must be communicated. An acceptance means an acceptance of a proposal communicated to the person who made the proposal. Mere giving a consent is not enough. Suppose, when I say I want to sell my book for 100 rupees, you want to buy the book, you decided, you inform your friend, I have decided to buy the book for 100 rupees, but that is not a valid acceptance. An acceptance to be valid must be communicated, and must be communicated to the very person, the same person who made the proposal. A communication of an acceptance to some other person other than the one who made the proposal is not a valid acceptance. So if I make a proposal, you must communicate your acceptance to me and me alone. And if you communicate it to somebody, there is no valid acceptance, and therefore there is no agreement and no question of contract, and the question of breach of contract does not arise, and a suit if filed has to be dismissed. Now, if an acceptance is made, it must be communicated. Well, if it is a proposal made to a single person, it's not a big problem. Many times the proposals are made in vague manners. Vague manners means the terms are not certain. I say, I want to sell oil, 100 tons of oil to you at the rate of 500 rupees per ton. Is it a valid proposal? The answer is no. one of the conditions for the validity of a proposal is the terms of the proposal must be certain in their meaning or capable of being made certain looking into the surrounding circumstances. If I say, I want to sell oil, which oil? Is it a sandal oil? Is it a coconut oil? Is it a crude oil? Or is it a mobile oil? Which oil I want to sell to you? Since the terms of the proposal are not definite in their meaning, so the whole transaction is void, invalid, not enforceable, so no contract is created. That was the best stated in one of the old English cases called Guthing versus Lim, where you see a man agreed to buy a horse and purchased a horse, and at the time of purchasing the horse, he told the seller, if this horse turns to be lucky, I will buy one more horse from you or pay 5 pounds more. Well, the first horse was given, and later, the seller started asking the buyer, you buy one more horse or you give 5 pounds as promised. The buyer refused. The seller files a suit in the court saying this defendant, the buyer has committed a breach of a contract. He made a promise to buy another horse or pay 5 pounds more. He has not done any of these things. Please make an order compelling him to perform what he agreed to perform. Then the court said, what was the terms of the buying another horse? Thus it was subject to a condition. If the horse turns lucky, the court said, what is turning to be lucky? The luck is a so vague concept, differs from person to person. If a man is a very poor, getting 10 rupees, he thinks he is lucky. A rich man who gets even 1 lakh rupees may not find it, he is lucky. A man may think that if he gets a male issue, he is lucky, and some other people cannot think that way. Luck is a so vague term, the court said, unless the terms of the proposal or an offer are capable of being understood in a definite meaning, they cannot constitute a valid proposal, and therefore in this case the term used is so vague, so there is no valid proposal and there is no question of an acceptance, because an acceptance means an acceptance of a valid proposal. If there is no valid proposal, no acceptance, therefore no promise, no agreement and no contract. Who told this? Because breach of contract presupposes the existence of a contract. If not validly created, no legal proceedings can be maintained. And many times, the acceptance is made. If there are only 2 parties, the problem is not. But many times the person to whom the proposal is made is a body of persons. Like in the colleges or the societies or in the certain ministries where there is a board. For example, you make an application saying that you want to be appointed as a manager in this institution. Your application itself is a proposal. Now by making mere application, contract is created. It has to be accepted. Well, whom have you made this application? You have made an application to the management of this institution. Well, this institution is not managed by a single person. There is a body of persons. In such a case, an acceptance has to be made by the whole body of persons. And if an acceptance is communicated by only one of them, it is not a valid acceptance, no contract is created. In Powell versus Lee, one of the cases that I cited here, it so happened the plaintiff, the man who went to the court and filed a suit, had made an application to the defendant management body requesting for an appointment as a headmaster of the school which was run by the defendant body. And it so happened there were a number of applications, so all were duly considered in the management. The management body passed a resolution appointing the plaintiff as a headmaster. They passed a resolution. But neither the chairman nor the secretary communicated that, and one of the members privately told the plaintiff that he has been appointed as headmaster of the school. And this fellow was waiting for an order from the management. Well, after a few days, the members of the management changed their mind and appointed somebody as a headmaster other than the plaintiff. plaintiff was terribly upset, and now he files a suit against the defendant, the management body running the school, saying they have committed the breach of a contract and they must be ordered to appoint him as a headmaster as per the resolution passed by them. The question before the court was, if the defendant body is to be held guilty of breach of contract, it must be shown that a contract is created which necessarily raises the question, was there a valid proposal and was there a valid acceptance, which are to be sorted out in the ultimate analysis. The court said, well, the plaintiff made an application, it's a valid proposal. He expressed his desire to serve the institution as a headmaster, so the application of everybody is a proposal. Then what is an acceptance? The resolution was passed by the body accepting his application. But the court said, when the proposal is made to a body of persons, it has to be accepted by the whole body. Well, in this case, resolution has been passed, but it was not communicated to him. An acceptance to be valid must be communicated by the person to whom the proposal is made. If it is made to a body of persons, the entire body should accept it, or may be accepted by a single person authorized by the whole body to make an acceptance. Well, no body of management, will accept it, by writing a letter. Every member is not expected to write a letter saying that we have appointed. So what is normally done under the rules? Either the chairman or secretary or somebody is authorized by the bylaws to communicate the decisions of the management. So communication by an authorized person alone is a valid acceptance. In this case, there was no communication. Therefore, mere passing of a resolution did not constitute an acceptance. Hence, there was no contract created. Hence, there was no legal duty created on the part of the body of the management to appoint the plaintiff as a headmaster. So, the defendant school body is not guilty of breach of a contract. So, the second important thing is, an acceptance to be valid must be made by the very person or persons to whom the proposal is made, and an acceptance means an acceptance communicated to the proposer who made the proposal. Then what are other essential things? Indian Contract Act deals with those. One of the situations is, it is an established principle both in the English law of contract and in India that there must be an intention to create legal relations. What is this intention to create legal relations? In the day-to-day life there are many proposals and many acceptances which don't carry the legal intentions. For example, you ask me, sir, tomorrow is my birthday, would you attend the birthday function? I say yes. The moment you say, are you coming, your statement is a proposal. When I say yes, I am coming, my statement would become an acceptance, it becomes a promise, it is an agreement. Suppose I don't come for your birthday party tomorrow. Can you file a suit against me for a breach of a contract? Common sense tells that you will not succeed. The reason is why I am not guilty of a breach of a promise or a contract. The reason is the agreement between you and me is not enforceable by law because there was no intention to create legal relations. A promise to attend a social function, a promise to attend a dinner, a promise to attend a marriage, a promise to go for a walking, a promise to join a friend, say for a movie, a promise to play a friendly cricket match. In all these cases, the presumption is that there is no intention to create legal relations, so therefore such promises or such agreements are not enforceable by law, hence they don't constitute a contract. And there is a presumption that in all the commercial transactions, whether parties speak or not, whether they express or not, there is an intention to create legal relations. If I say I want to sell this book to you, if I want to sell my motorcycle to you, if I want to sell 10 bags of cement to you, if I want to sell my house, these are all known as the commercial transactions or business transactions. And the presumption of the law is, in all such cases, there is an intention to create legal relations, unless the contrary is proved by the parties in the courts of law. And contrary means the opposite is proved. So if a case is brought before the court saying here is a man who agreed to sell 500 bags of cement to me and he has not sold, the law presumes There was an intention to create legal relations, hence it is a valid agreement enforceable by law. He must sell it as per the terms of the contract. So in all business transactions, you are going to deal with, the presumption is there is an intention to create legal relations. In all other family matters, a husband's promise to get some saris to the wife, or a father's promise to the son to get a motorcycle if he passes in a first class. In all these cases, the promises are made out of natural love and affection. They are not enforceable if broken by the parties. If husband does not get the saris promise, if father does not give the motorbike promise to the son, they cannot go to the court because such agreements are not enforceable by law because there is no intention to create legal relations. The second important thing is there must be a lawful consideration. A consideration is nothing but something given in return for a promise. Law presumes that no man is foolish enough to make a promise to do or not to do something in favor of another unless he gets something in return. This something in return given to the promise itself is known as a consideration. If I say I will give my book to you, I am making a proposal. If you say yes sir, you are making an acceptance. It is a promise, it is an agreement. And if I don't give the book to you tomorrow, and if you go to the court against me, your is not maintainable, the court will ask, well, he made a promise to give the book. What consideration is there? What have you done in return for that promise? Nothing. I made a promise to give the book. In return for you doing what? Nothing. So my promise is said to be without a consideration. Frequently it is called as a nudum pactum. Nudum pactum means a naked agreement. An agreement where there is a promise in return for nothing. And such agreements are not enforceable by law. Except a few exceptions are there. A man may make a promise. For example, you make a promise to give 5 lakh rupees to this institution. In return for what? In return for nothing. And suppose you fail to perform, then can the institution go against you to the court? That depends upon what type of promise you have made. There are some exceptions, as I say. If you have made a promise to give 5 lakh rupees to this institution, and if that promise is in writing, if it is a promise made in writing, if it is made on account of natural love and affection, if it is made between the parties standing in near relation, such promises are enforceable even though there is no consideration. Or suppose you are a student of this institution and after finishing the course you feel, sir, I am so deeply obliged. This institution gave me such a wonderful experience in the life, so I want to give 5 lakhs rupees. In such case, the promise is enforceable even though there is no consideration. So except barring a few exceptions stated in the Indian Contract Act numbering around 5, law wants a promise or an agreement to be enforced in the courts of law as a contract must be supported by consideration, and consideration is nothing but something given. It is a price of the promise. It is something in return for something, what is technically known as quid pro quo. I do something, you do in return for it. I say, I want to give this book to you if you give me 100 rupees. Your act of giving 100 rupees to me itself is a consideration for my promise, and it's a book. I say, I will give this book to you if you write 5 pages of my notes. You write 5 pages of my notes. That itself is a consideration for my promise to give the book. If I don't give it, you can go to the court and get it enforced in the court. So this is the second condition. And third condition is there must be a lawful object. Lawful object means the purpose of the agreement should be lawful. What is the lawful? Section 23 of the Indian Contract Act says, well, in the following circumstances, the object or consideration cannot be said to be lawful. If the purpose is to do something prohibited by law, and tell you, I will give you 1 lakh rupees if you beat that fellow. Beating somebody is forbidden by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, a part of the criminal law of India. So an agreement to do such things can't be said to be with a lawful object and therefore it is not enforceable. Or if it involves and implies an injury to the person or the property of another, I say if you burn his house, I will give you 2 lakhs. It is also forbidden by the law, hence the agreement is not enforceable. So there are such circumstances. I, for example, if it is a fraudulent, for instance, you say, well, I am having an income tax problem, these fellows are likely to come, I want to keep this money, in your account for 1 year. After 1 year, you shall transfer it to me. So you transfer 1 crore to me. Or you purchase some property in my name, saying that after 1 year I should transfer it. After 1 year, I refuse to transfer. You file a suit against me saying he has made a promise. It may be in writing, but still it is not enforceable. Because the intention or the purpose of the agreement was to deceive somebody. In such case, there can't be said to be a lawful object, and if there is no lawful object, the agreement is not enforceable by law, or it is not a contract, and therefore there cannot be any remedy in the courts of law for a breach of such a transaction. And the fourth thing is the parties must be competent to contract. Who is competent to contract? Anyone who fulfills the 3 conditions. Number 1, he or she must be of the age of majority. Everyone domiciled in India completing the age of 18 years is presumed to have attained the age of majority, and thus one condition is fulfilled. Secondly, he must be a person of sound mind at the time of entering into the transaction. A person is said to be of sound mind if at the time of entering into the transaction he is capable of understanding the consequences of each transaction and the effect of the transaction upon his interest. Sometimes people are born idiots, some people are mad, they cannot understand anything. Somebody may go and ask them to put a signature for a document transferring the land. They don't know what they are doing. They cannot be said to be persons of sound mind. Or it may so happen a person is suffering from a very high degree of fever in a hospitalized condition. He doesn't know what he is doing. Temperature is running 104, 105 like that, and somebody puts a document and saying, well, you are giving this land for 1 year. In fact, it is written inside, it is totally gifted. They are not valid transactions because the person, giving his consent or entering into contract cannot be said to be of sound mind at the time of entering into contract. But subsequently, if he becomes unsound mind, it does not affect. If a man today agrees to sell his house for 5 lakhs rupees and tomorrow he becomes mad, that contract is not affected. It is validly enforceable against him if he dies, his family representatives. So the soundness of the mind or the competency to contract is to be seen from the time when the transaction is created, not later, not when it is going to be performed. And thirdly, he should not have been disqualified from any particular law. Sometimes, laws impose restrictions upon certain persons not to do certain transactions. They are specifically disqualified. For example, trustees cannot purchase the trust property themselves. They cannot be said to be competent because they are disqualified by law from contracting. So all persons who fulfill these 3 conditions are said to be competent to contract. And the fourth one is there must be a free consent. What is meant by a free consent? A free consent is a consent which is not caused by any one of the 5 elements which are known as the vitiating elements. Number 1, coercion, which means a compulsion. A is the owner of a plot and B is his neighbor who is quite politically dominant, and B returns A, you must sell your plot to me for 1 lakh, otherwise see the consequence. A helplessly agrees to sell the plot for 1 lakh rupees, being afraid of his life. the transaction is not valid. Because the consent of A was taken by coercion. Coercion means compelling some person by doing something or threatening to do something which is forbidden by the Indian Penal Code. So if the consent of a party to an agreement is caused by coercion or compulsion, then such a transaction is said to be a contract voidable. Voidable means which can be avoided at the option of the party whose consent was so caused. Then the second element is the undue influence. There are certain type of relations existing between the parties, both contracting parties, which are of such a nature, one is in a dominant position to influence the will of another. For example, when a father sells a property to the son, father is in a dominant position. A spiritual guru is in a dominant position so far as the disciple is concerned. A deputy commissioner, for example, is in a dominant position when it comes to entering into contract with a clerk working under him. Suppose the clerk is having a plot and he doesn't want to sell the plot, what he has, but the deputy commissioner calls him and says, you must sell that plot to me. Though he is unwilling, he may be compelled to sell psychologically, though no threat is used. Because he thinks if I don't agree, deputy commissioner will be unpleasant with me, then he may affect right, see some wrong confidential report, etc., etc. So when the relations between the contracting parties are of such nature that one of them is in a position to dominate or command the will of another party, it is said to be a case of a contract caused by undue influence. In such case also, the transaction is voidable or it can be avoided later by the person whose consent was caused by such undue influence. The examples of such relations are, as I told you, a father and a son, a deputy commissioner or a clerk, any officer for that matter, not necessarily deputy commissioner. And spiritual guru or a disciple. A disciple always thinks his spiritual guru is going to tell right things only. Such kind of relations may result in affecting the transactions. Then the third element is the misrepresentation or fraud. Many times the contracts are entered into by giving false representations. A, for example, is owner of a factory which he wants to sell. Let us say it is a factory producing the lathe machines. It has a capacity to produce some 20 lathe machines a month. In order to get more price, he tells the buyers, my factory has a capacity to produce 40 lathe machines a month. Believing it to be true, if the buyer buys that, it is not a valid agreement. It is not a contract. It can be avoided by the buyer later when he comes to know the real capacity of the factory. It is called as a misrepresentation. Sometimes misrepresentation is made innocently and sometimes it is made knowingly. There may be a fellow who is the owner of a factory producing the lathe machines. Too rich man who never went to the factory manages through the manager. He has no intention to deceive. When the buyer comes and asks, what is the capacity of your factory? The seller, not with any intention to deceive. He himself is ignorant. He never went to the factory. He doesn't know what is the capacity. It produces 20 lathe machines a month, but he says, well, my factory is producing 40 lathe machines a month. This is known as innocent misrepresentation. But suppose the seller, the factory owner really knew that it is producing only 20 lathe machines, but knowing well that it is producing 20 lathe machines, if he makes a representation that it is producing 40 lathe machines, then it becomes a case of what is known as a fraud. Whether it is a fraud or whether it is an innocent misrepresentation. In both cases, the consent of the party is said to be not free and therefore it can be avoided by the parties. Then the final thing is a mistake. Often there are mistakes committed by the parties because of their negligence or because of their nature and so on. For example, A is a man having two blue cars. One is of a 5 horsepower and another is of a 10 horsepower. A wants to sell his small car of 5 horsepower and says, well, I want to sell my blue car for 5 lakhs rupees. B, a buyer, thinks that A is selling a blue car of 10 horsepower. Neither seller tells clearly which car nor buyer inquires which car properly. The seller A thinks that he is selling the blue car of 5 horsepower. Buyer agrees to buy it for 5 lakhs, thinking that he is going to get the blue car of 10 horsepower. And later he realizes, in such case also, the agreement is not enforceable by law, because the consent of the seller is said to have been caused by a mistake regarding the subject matter of the contract. These are the few essentials to be seen in considering the question whether a contract has been created. As I told earlier, a contract is basically a field of bargaining and a field of freedom given to the parties, and it is left for the parties to fix the terms and conditions as they please. Courts have no business to poke their noses. For example, you can agree to sell your motorcycle for, say, 10 rupees. Somebody comes and asks, are you ready to sell your motorcycle? You say, yes, I am ready to sell it for 10 rupees. The agreement is valid. Suppose if you don't give the motorcycle and if the fellow goes to the court, you can't take a defense in the court and say, sir, how can a motorcycle be sold for 10 rupees worth of 60,000 rupees? The court says that is your lookout. If with your eyes open you have agreed to sell your motorbike for 10 rupees, you are under a duty to sell it, you have no option not to sell it. If you don't, you will be guilty of breach of a contract. So the price of the consideration of the promise is left to the parties. A man may agree to sell his Impala car for 5 rupees and his Vulcan for 50,000 rupees. Both the transactions are valid and enforceable if the earlier requirements are fulfilled. In other words, adequacy or sufficiency of a consideration need not be proportionate to the value of the promise. To put in other words, adequacy of a consideration is irrelevant in enforcing the contractual transactions in the courts of law. Whether the consideration is too small or too big, it is left to the parties. It is for them to decide. It is after all their contract. And every time you enter into any exchange of proposal and acceptance, you are creating a contract. If a gardener comes to your house and says, well, I will clean your compound if you give me 50 rupees, you are entering into contract. Very frequently, there are misconceptions even at higher level that a person appointed for 6 months or 1 year is a contractual person, and a person appointed in the scale for a period of 20 years till his retirement is not a contractual. It is a misconception. Anything that is created by a contract is a contractual. Whether you appoint a person for a period of 20 years or whether you appoint for a person for 10 days or whether you appoint a person for 1 day to paint the walls of your house, in all these transactions the relations are contractual. Once a contract is created, legal rights and duties are created for the parties and they have no option not to perform them. If they fail to perform, they will be responsible or accountable to the other party in the courts of law for a breach of a contract. So to avoid liability, many times certain companies or corporations or business houses think in advance. Because there have been cases where the railway companies or the airlines companies have been held responsible for not performing the contract properly in transporting the passengers at the agreed destination, and they had to cup off heavy amount of money as a compensation for the breach of a contract. Because another established principle is, if a contract is broken by one party, the other party who suffers any loss due to the breach of a contract has to be compensated proportionately. Suppose you are going to a high court to Bangalore to argue it. You book a ticket by Chennai Express, and a train, instead of going in the morning 7 o'clock, goes at afternoon 3 o'clock. And you file a suit against the railway company saying on account of the non-performance of your contract, you had declared the train will reach Bangalore at 7:30. I had a case to be argued in the High Court, which I could not do, due to which I lost my fees of 5 lakhs rupees. So you are responsible and you should compensate. Well, the courts in the past ordered the payment from such a company. So what these companies and these corporations are doing now, they want to protect themselves from such kind of a possibilities. It may so happen on the road, it may rain heavily and some bridge may collapse or some track may be damaged and there may be a delay of 6 or 8 hours which are essential for performing the functions, to go slow, etc. In such cases, if the companies are going to be held liable to compensate such money to the other contracting parties, the companies cannot run the business. So what these companies or corporations may do, at the time of entering into contract only, they put some clauses. They are called as exclusion of liability clauses. A railway company which sells the tickets to you, sells the tickets with certain terms and conditions. What are those terms and conditions? One of the conditions is we are not responsible for any loss of time or any delay or any cancellation of the train. This condition is notified right on the notice board of the railway. If you are buying a ticket, they say, well, look here the condition. Those companies which enter into few contracts a day, they put in writing and take the signature of the parties, like an insurance corporation, etc. But a railway company or a bus company which enters into thousands of contracts every day, because thousands of passengers are traveling, with each a contract is created. It is not possible to put them in writing form. Imagine you are buying a ticket to Khanapur, paying some 3 rupees or so. If railway company, according to the Indian Contract Act, is expected to put all the terms and the conditions in a particular form, and if you have to sign it, it becomes impossible to run the railway business. For sake of getting 3 rupees, they may have to spend 10, 15 rupees. It is a business impossibility. So commercial difficulties dictate a sort of a compromise. So what the railway companies do? They say it is not possible to read all the terms and the conditions to every passenger who comes to the counter to buy a ticket. So they write these conditions on the notice board and say, subject to these terms and the conditions, we are entering into contract. Either you accept it or don't accept it. Of course, contract is a bargain, but these are a typical type of contracts where there is hardly any bargaining possibility. If I am saying I want to sell my book for 100 rupees, you may say, sir, I want to buy for 90 rupees. I may say, no, 98 rupees I am ready. You may say, well, 96. I say, no, at the most 97. Then you may say, well, 97 rupees, all right, sir, but you must give your question papers also. It's after all a negotiation. Ultimately, we may agree. Terms and conditions are there. I may say, well, I will give question papers to you and the book for 97 rupees, but I am likely to require them every year, at the end of examination, so you have to return for 10 days. You may agree or you may not agree. So, contract goes on with the negotiation. If you go to the railway station saying, well, I am entering into contract with you and I don't agree for these terms and conditions, railway company has no time to discuss about you. Either you agree to the terms and the conditions and buy the ticket, or you quit it. And such type of contracts are known as standard form of contracts. If you go to the bank and say you want to open an SB account, the banker opens an account. Opening an account in the bank is entering into contract. But a banker contracts with certain terms and conditions. He says minimum balance is to be maintained 100 rupees. If your check is given without sufficient funds, then we will impose a fine of 50 rupees. So many things are there. It is not possible for a banker to read every term and a condition subject to which the contract of opening an account is being created. What he does is he prints them in all the forms, and anyone who comes will be given a form. It means the terms and conditions are standardized, and such contracts which are entered into in the standardized forms are known as standard form of contracts. A contract with an insurance company, a contract with a railway company, a contract with a railway company. Now, the problem arises. Many terms and conditions are there. The terms and conditions are so many in the number, it is not possible to print them in bold letters. If they print in bold letters, it will become a booklet, commercially not viable. So they print them in very thin letters. So sometimes in such thin letters that a customer cannot read them properly. And disputes have come before the courts. where the bankers or the companies or corporations are saying, well, subject to these terms and conditions we have entered into contract, and the customer complaining, and never read them because I could not have read. They are so small. So what the courts have done? The courts have said the companies or corporations are free to enter into standard forum contracts with numerous terms and conditions, whatever they like. But they must prove that the other party has accepted the terms and conditions. And for what is to be done? They have said a reasonably sufficient notice is to be given. What is a reasonably sufficient notice? It means the customer should be in a position to understand that he is entering into contract with the terms and conditions notified. Notification must be there. You know, in one of the cases, Henderson versus Stevenson, an English case, the plaintiff was a passenger by the ferry services of the defendant. He went, purchased a ticket. A small ticket was given after paying the required fare. It contained words: Dublin to Whitehaven, the place starting point and the reaching point, just like a railway ticket containing the place of living and destiny. Date was there. File a suit, the company will say, see here, we have already stated, we are not responsible if the car does not start. Just because a reasonably sufficient notice has been given by the car company and just because the condition is known by the customer, does it mean to say the company is not responsible? The courts have said no. A car company which sells a car is under a fundamental duty to sell the car which runs on the road. And to give another example, suppose a Bombay man comes to a Belgaum and goes to a person who manufactures chairs, wooden chairs, let us say. He says, I want 1 dozen sandalwood chairs. What is the rate? The man in Belgaum says, well, 5,000 rupees for each chair, sandalwood chair. Let us say one of the terms and conditions, a contract in the written form, he says, we are not responsible if the chairs are not made of the same wood for which they are contracted. So the Bombay man says, well, you should send them to Bombay. This man agrees and sends them ordinary chairs of made in general wood. If a suit is filed against the seller here, can this fellow take a defense that I had already put the terms and the conditions which contains that we are not responsible if the wood is changed? The courts have said no. Even if this condition is known and accepted by the other party, is not binding upon the buyer for the simple reason this clause is committing what is known as a fundamental breach of a contract. To put in other words, no party, no company, no corporation can protect himself or itself by putting such clauses if the effect of non-performance is to commit the fundamental breach of it. A man who agrees to sell sandalwood chairs is under a fundamental duty to sell sandalwood chairs only. Then how can he exclude? He can exclude the secondary liability. For example, the Bombay fellow buyer says, you must send them safely to Bombay to my place. So transportation is also undertaken by this seller. He can put a condition. We are not responsible if there is any damage in the course of the journey. Because sending the chairs from Belgaum to Bombay is not a fundamental duty. To make sandalwood chairs is a fundamental duty. So this theory is known as a doctrine of a fundamental breach of a contract. In order to minimize the effect of a sweeping, excluding, limiting liability clauses introduced by company or corporations. Well, with this thing I would like to take your leave because it's quite a lengthy subject. I have given you a brief idea. What are the contracts? What are essentials? How contracting the parties can exclude their liabilities? And to what extent the exclusion is permissible in the judicial. Thank you very much.